I had IBS actually prior to getting ME chronic fatigue, and I remember going to the doctor and saying, I've got stomach pain. He said, you've got irritable bowel syndrome. I said, I know I've got an irritable bowel, but what's wrong with me? It was kind of like the label, again, chronic fatigue, you go and say, I'm tired all the time. You've got chronic fatigue. It's not actually a diagnosis. No. It's a label for a set of symptoms. And I think that's if the researchers can't agree on the subgroups and this kind of thing, it doesn't make it very easy for the people out there which are living with the illness. So a lot of what we're looking to do, and we'll talk about in a moment, is an organisation to put together conceptual frameworks that explain how a lot of these different things interact. So if we come to, we talk about, so all of the stuff we're going to talk about here is in a free information pack that if you leave details, we'll send out to you, and it's all in there anyway, so don't worry too much about trying to take notes or anything. But we talk about basically predisposing factors, we talk about triggers, and we talk about perpetuating factors. What we mean by that is predisposing factors are basically things that were happening prior to you getting any symptoms, prior to getting ill, which basically predisposed you to the likelihood of getting something like ME, chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, and that kind of thing. Because, of course, the predisposing factors alone aren't enough, because there are people that can have these that never actually develop ME. So we'll talk about it a little bit later. We also talk about triggers, that often there's a number of things going on prior to getting ill. Then there's almost like the final straw that breaks the camel's back. And the trigger, so we'll come to it, be something like a major surgery or a vaccination for some people or a major life trauma, but something happens, which is the final thing that pushes over the edge. But we tend to think, how can that cause all of this other stuff that's gone on? And often the clues are in these predisposing factors. So we break these down, and this is an evolving model, and actually when we were doing talks last year, the model's different this year to last year. So there may be things that we say today that we may get more clarification in time. But we talk about basically 7 subgroups. So maybe Sanna is probably worth you doing the nutrition side. I don't know if we even said, Sanna works on the nutrition side of the clinic. I originally worked on the psychology side. My main role these days, I do see some patients, but is basically also running the organisation and running training courses we run for practitioners a certain amount as well. So pretty well you do the nutrition side. You do it better than I will.
Okay, right, yeah, so on the nutrition side, I mean, as Alex was saying, these are the kind of underlying sort of weaknesses, if you like, that we're looking for. Because again, when you start looking at an individual and when you start working out the kind of approach to build their recovery on solid foundations, again, there's no point in just going to the tip of the iceberg and sort of treating the topmost symptom, if you like. Just at the very simple level, if you've got a headache, well, yeah, you can take a painkiller. But until you ask, why did you get the headache in the first place, you're not going to get a long-term resolution. And I think that's what definitely makes it far, far more interesting and exciting and satisfying for me to work with this illness, because you do have to do much more kind of really, really good, solid detective work almost. So looking on the nutrition side, the 3 subgroups we sort of roughly break it down to, or people down to. First one is the immune system subgroup. I'd say this is probably one of the bigger ones. And it could be, again, very few of us, probably, nobody's ever completely born sort of shiny and perfect. We may have genetic predisposition for certain things. There are sort of environmental factors in our childhood that can start that sort of slow trigger effect. I mean, sometimes I think it's like a boat. You start adding more and more and more load till that final trigger point comes. And sometimes, Alex, you were talking about something possibly quite dramatic triggers, like traumas or vaccinations or viruses. For some people, certainly, I see it isn't like that at all. It just gradually fills up until the boat can take it no more, and it just starts sinking no matter what. But anyway, so going back to the immune system side, it's really people, often I see when I start a nutrition consultation, the first thing I do is look right back to childhood, sort of from birth. And often the story tends to centre around repeated bouts of tonsillitis as a young child, which leads to repeated rounds of antibiotics, which then starts having an impact on your gut bacterial balance, which then has an impact on your immune system and your ability to fight that next bout of tonsillitis that sure as hell is now going to come round again. And so you get that sort of, again, slow trigger effect there. It may be that you were sort of slightly atopic as a child, i.e. there's sort of the risk of eczema, asthma, some food allergies. Again, that just, and there's many of us out here that, have eczema, asthma and never develop ME, but it is a little, kind of just a little trickle weakening factor there that's putting a strain on your system. For some people, the repeated infections may come a little bit later in life, sort of during their teens, as a result of some stressful events at that point. So again, bit of a chicken and egg. We can talk about that. I mean, you might never completely say, right, this is the starting point. This is where it all started. There's very complex interactions going on in your body. The detox subtype is more people who may have a predisposition to not processing sort of waste and toxins particularly well. I mean, again, you don't have to necessarily be exposed to huge external, real kind of toxins. All of us produce metabolic waste just as we live and breathe that we have to neutralize and eliminate. Some of us don't do it quite effectively as others, so it starts building up and it starts causing a stress and strain on the body. Structural subtype is something actually ultimately where, again, I mean, this is the interesting thing, we certainly as a clinic don't claim that we can cover it all, because we can't. And structural subtypes tend to be people who have sort of possibly some misalignments in their spine. Their lymph flow is somewhat restricted, and again that affects, I mean, the detox and the structural subtypes kind of get interwoven in that regard, because you do remove a lot of your toxins through the lymph flow as well. But we can, through nutrition, improve your detox capacity, but again, structurally you may need actual physical manipulation to correct that. And all of those just start that little trickle effect, as I was saying, that starts increasing the load on the body.
Yeah, and I guess that's where things like, have you done the parent technique? Yeah, so that's where the parent technique can fit in with the structural subtype. Mm-hmm. As kind of Sanna was saying, we certainly are not sitting here saying we have all the answers or we do everything in-house. There are certain things which you need to, for example, see a face-to-face practitioner to work with that side. And Gail Sumner, who is a parent practitioner who organised last night, works quite closely with the clinic with a number of mutual patients.